right, well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the final Eclectics Diversity uh, lecture. And I have the pleasure of introducing our guest, Ayala, who is a seasoned award-winning news producer and the recipient of 4 national Emmys and 6 Edward R. Murrow Awards. He teaches courses in both English and Spanish and specializes in broadcast journalism, multimedia production, field producing and reporting, backpack journalism, and international reporting. Professor Ayala also oversees the school's investigative news broadcasts, Tusk TV, and the award winning Spanish language newscast Al Dia. Prior to joining Cal State Fullerton, Mr. Ayala covered breaking news stories from around the world as a multi-platform producer for ABC News, where for more than 15 years he excelled as a covering Latin America and South America. He's also the executive producer of End of the Road, a documentary that chronicles the plight of children left behind in Latin America who made the harrowing journey to the United States to be reunited with their parents. He's a graduate of UC Berkeley and USC's Annenberg School of Journalism, and he obtained his journalism teaching certification from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism. And I have the great pleasure of introducing Dr. Jesus Ayala.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for having me. This is the second time that I teach, or actually just speak to OLLI. And I really like coming to OLLI because it's always a great crowd. And I was just telling Janice that, I really appreciate people that appreciate learning. And you always ask very insightful questions that even challenge me to sort of think about things differently. And so that's always really exciting for me. So as Janice said, I guess I'm what you would call a veteran in TV news. I know sometimes I don't look like it. I still get confused sometimes as being a student. I assure you I'm much older than I look. I just have those good family genes, thankfully. I'll look back at this one day and be thankful for it. But, today, what I mostly have been asked to speak about is a recent milestone that we celebrated at CSUF. CSUF recently won a student Emmy, and this is the first time ever that CSUF Fullerton wins an Emmy. In fact, it's the first time that a CSU ever wins an Emmy. Believe it or not, I know it sounds crazy to think, but believe it or not, only San Francisco State has also won an Emmy. And it was, I believe, sort of it was not so much a news Emmy, it was more for long-term projects. But as far as an actual news Emmy, CSUF is the only school that has ever won this. And so recently, whenever I speak, people want to know about the Emmy win and how it happened. And so what I was asked to do is basically go over how I prepared the students to be able to achieve this special milestone. So I'll mostly be talking about that. It's a short presentation. But as I was mentioning, I do have a pretty long background in journalism. I've been a journalist for 20 years. I worked most of my life at ABC News. I started off in radio at NPR. Then I went to Univision in Miami and did long form journalism. And then I landed at ABC News, where I worked with Peter Jennings and Ted Koppel way back in the day. I had the distinct pleasure of being Ted Koppel's production assistant during Hurricane Katrina. I would oftentimes run to get Peter Jennings coffee and get him sometimes even ties when he would forget a tie. So I have tons of stories. I've also worked with Diane Sawyer, Barbara Walters, obviously news icons. So if, when we get to the Q&A portion, if there's more of an interest in anything pertaining to journalism or anything that you're seeing out, in news currently, there's so much happening with, so much news is happening, as anything from, what's happening at the border to the racial awakening that's happening in America. If there are any questions about what's happening, or even any questions about just journalism in general, or the behind the scenes, or if you've always wondered, why do journalists do this? It bugs me. That's okay. You can ask. I'll be happy to answer anything. I'm really yours for an hour and a half. And if my presentation about our news ME turns out to be a little boring for you and you want to pivot into something else, I am completely happy to do that. Okay. So let me start off though with what I was asked to present, which was how CSUF won its first Emmy. So I'm about to share my screen for you. Okay, so again, this year we had a pretty big event that happened. We won our first Emmy. Again, this is the first time that CSUF wins this prestigious award. It's actually known as the College Television Award, but for those of us that are in this industry, we oftentimes just refer to it as a Student Emmy. This is really important because we won out of 374 entries that were submitted from 112 colleges across the country. So just think about those numbers. That's pretty big. 112 colleges submitted for this award, and we won. What I find super important, and one of the things that really gives me a lot of pride, is the fact that the team from CSUF was comprised entirely by 8 Latinos. And as you know, CSUF is the largest Hispanic serving institution within the CSU system. So the fact that our team was comprised entirely of Latinos, and we were able to win this award, by the way, with bilingual content, I think is super important. I am big on bilingualism. As Janice was mentioning, I teach, half of the courses I teach are in English, half of them are in Spanish. I oversee our Spanish language newscast. And so I'm always pushing students to become bilingual. And the fact that we were able to compete against the more prestigious schools like USC, ASU, Syracuse, Columbia, Northwestern, Berkeley, and actually beat them was honestly just pretty amazing. And so we were obviously ecstatic about this win. Now, I want to give you some context of what we won. So we won with a program that was called a border emergency. And so what happened is that in the fall of 2018, it happened to be my very first year here at CSUF, I had this crazy idea that I wanted to create a border reporting course. And I decided that I was going to take students to the border and sort of give them an immersive learning experience. I wanted to sort of expose them to some of the type of reporting that I learned while at ABC News. And I thought this was important because if you remember, in the winter of 2018, this is when we had that first wave of Central Americans coming to the US-Mexico border in what is now known as a migrant caravan, right? And a lot of students had questions of, why is this happening? What is happening? Who are the people? Why are they leaving Central America? And so I thought it was a really great time to really take a deep dive into border politics and really give them a sort of understanding of why it is that you have so many Central Americans that are fleeing drug violence and poverty back home. And so I created this class, and one of the components ended up being going to the border. But as I'm about to tell you, that wasn't actually the plan right in the beginning. So this is the context. This is sort of when we decided to go to the border to report on the migrant caravan. And in the end, we ended up winning an award for our reporting there. But I want to now kind of backtrack and tell you how this all started. So yes, we were there, and we were, in a second, I'm going to show you a clip of what we did. But let me now backtrack and tell you how this started. I'll come back to this clip in a second. Oh. Today on a special edition. All right, it's not letting me go back, so I'll just show you the clip and then I'll backtrack in a second. This is about 7 minutes. I just want to show you sort of first minutes of the program that we put together at the border so that you can get a sense of what we were recognized for.
Of Al Dia, a border emergency. Thousands of Central American migrants arrive at the U.S.-Mexico border seeking asylum. But the Trump administration pledges not on our watch and sends more troops to the border.
In a couple of weeks, you're going to see a very secure border. You just watch. Just watch.
We have team coverage from Mexico as tension and protests quickly rise.
Plus, they risked their lives and fought for our country, but they were deported after they returned home.
Here we are, honorably discharged and dishonorably discarded.
Should there be a special pathway to citizenship for U.S. veterans? And a very candid interview with a smuggler with a clear message for President Trump.
This is a special edition of Al Dia, a border emergency, reporting from the U.S.-Mexico border.
Welcome to the special English edition of Al Dia. I'm Regina Urita.
And I'm Dominic Torres. Today we are reporting from the U.S.-Mexico border.
We begin with breaking news here in Tijuana. Nearly 8,000 migrants just arrived here, including thousands of women and their children. They set out on foot and risked their lives, traveling nearly 2,000 miles through treacherous terrains and risky neighborhoods. These migrants made the harrowing journey to escape poverty and gang violence. Their dream is to cross this border in hopes of attaining asylum. This will not be an easy process, and until then, migrants have been relocated to a sports arena that has been transformed into a shelter. Nearly 3,000 migrants are being held here already, with more on their way. Tijuana remains the last stop for these migrants, hoping to set foot in the U.S.
Meanwhile, over 40 migrants were arrested and deported at the border this past week. Chaos broke after a group of them made a dash and attempted to cross the border in plain sight. Seen here are migrants attempting to cross the border. Fences, street trafficking guards were no match for this alarming attempt. Tear gas flew from the U.S. side of the border as Border Patrol agents struggled to control the migrants, including many women and children.
And residents here in Tijuana are not happy at all with the arrival of the migrants. Fuera hondureños, or get out of here Hondurans, is what many residents here chanted, clearly expressing their unwavering disdain for the recently arrived caravan of migrants. Tensions came to a boil last night just a few blocks from here when Tijuana residents confronted the migrants. While they are being housed here, migrants are receiving aid from the local government, but many residents here say the local authorities should be focused on helping Tijuana's own residents who are in need.
While with nowhere else to go, their destination turns into a nightmare. As migrants are stuck in Tijuana, they face a crisis.
That's right. Here they face a strained immigration system backed up by the flow of even more migrants arriving in recent months. We have team coverage about this crisis that has caused a border emergency. And we begin with our reporter, Jessica Cardenas, who spoke to several migrants traveling in the caravan moments after they arrived here. Jessica?
Thanks, Regina. After traveling the 2,500-mile journey north, the first caravan of Central American migrants have reached the U.S.-Mexico border in hopes of seeking asylum. But their destination turned into a nightmare as they face a crisis here in the city of Tijuana. This is their harrowing story. They traveled the excruciating 2,500-mile journey north to the U.S.-Mexico border. Men, women, and children finding solidarity and strength in their numbers. A caravan of over 8,000 migrants in hopes of seeking asylum for the American dream. Their destination turned into a nightmare as thousands of migrants face a crisis at the U.S.-Mexico border. Arriving in Tijuana, a city already a host to thousands of asylum seekers waiting to cross legally into the U.S. Here, migrants have waited months in the hopes of getting across. Many staying in shelters like this one where we met a Central American woman fleeing persecution in her home country. We will call this woman Maria to protect her identity. Like many other migrants, her dreams were born of nightmares.
Cuando me vine para aquí ya no tenía opción de quedarme más allá. Una, ya no hay trabajo y otra tenía miedo por mi vida y la vida de mis hijos y de mi esposo también.
Maria is fleeing gang violence from the murder capital of the world, San Pedro Sula, Honduras.
Hoy estuviera muerta.
She fled after gang members murdered her younger sister who was pregnant.
Pues a ella la mataron y desde que a ella la mataron ha sido una tragedia para nosotros, pues porque él era la menor y nunca nos imaginamos que a ella le iba a pasar eso.
Her entire family threatened they would be next.
Hoy estuviera muerta, porque yo traigo unas pruebas de eso, de que cómo me llevaban amenazas a la casa.
This Central American migrant knows that feeling all too well. She left Honduras after she received death threats. She says she could never go back.
Se apoderaron los mareros, nos sacaron de la casa y nos dieron que saliéramos del país. Y la familia que mataron, la mía, todo el sufrimiento que uno pasa y todo, y más en el camino.
Traveling in the caravan are also grandmothers fleeing to protect their loved ones.
La vida está bien difícil por el motivo de la gente mala. A la niña me la iban a violar de 3 años.
Like this grandmother, in a blink of an eye, Maria took everything she could and fled Honduras with her 2 children.
Yo lo primero que agarré fue una mochila con pampers que estaba ahí, solo eso agarré y me vine. Yo dejé todo botado, yo no traía ni ropa para mí, solo la que traía puesta.
She was part of the thousands of migrants who made their way north to the border by foot, but her children couldn't resist the harrowing journey.
Ya la niña me decía, ya no, se me tiró en el pavimento y me decía, ya no mami, ya no quiero caminar. Caminamos, ya vamos a llegar y faltaban como 30 kilómetros más.
Even after her daughter contracted a fever and her 1-year-old son caught pneumonia, they kept walking. While making the journey, children are the ones who suffer most.
Siempre es difícil, más andando con niños. Porque mire, se enferman, la niña la tuve bien enferma, andaba vomitando, con diarrea, calentura.
Migrants like Jose are fleeing poverty and dream of getting across.
No me quiero quedar aquí. Mi sueño es llegar allá y ayudar a mi familia.
For Maria, this is her only hope for now, while the waiting game for her chance to claim asylum continues at this shelter.
Primeramente ellos que me lo den porque si me regresan. Yo como digo que solo a que me maten más.
Many other Central American women say there is no return to their home country.
Yo no puedo volver a El Salvador porque mi hijo corre peligro, tanto él como yo.
But asylum seekers face a strained immigration system, backlogged by the flow of migrant families arriving in recent months.
Right, so you get the picture. I did want to show you a good long clip of this because I did want to show you the type of work that the students did. And obviously I'm a little biased as a professor, but you know, I think that the work that they did was pretty outstanding. As someone who's worked in the industry for 20 years, you know, I think that you almost forget that they're students. And in fact, when professionals see this newscast in its entirety, the one question that they often ask me is, are these professionals, or you said these were students? So that kind of line gets blurred because they did such an amazing job. And so, you know, with humbleness and grace, we accept the award. I think they definitely earned that Emmy. This is hard reporting. It's reporting under very hard circumstances, not only for students, but I'm sorry, not only for professionals, but, you know, even for professionals, it's really hard to report under these circumstances and to kind of have the knowledge base to be able to report on these issues. So the fact that students were able to do this is just pretty remarkable. So that kind of gives you a sense of the work that they produced while they were there. And so now I just kind of want to backtrack and kind of explain how I prepared them. I think that the key that really won them the award is what we did in class before we even showed up. So I just want to backtrack a little and tell you how it is that I created this course. So again, in the fall of 2018, I had this crazy idea that I wanted to create a border course, and we ran it as COM 438T, reporting on minorities of the southern border. Now, I should mention that when I first conceptualized this course, it was really going to be an advanced seminar on reporting about immigration. So you can kind of see here the 15 weeks of our course. Every week, I decided that I would touch upon a different topic that related to immigration. So for example, we were going to start the course looking at the history of the border, how we even arrived at this border to begin with through the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. We were going to look at, obviously the migrant caravan and family separation, but it was also important to understand, what the crisis in Latin America in the 80s, and also talk about NAFTA and how NAFTA is implicated in migration. So you can kind of see that, there are a lot of topics here, a lot of modules that we went over. We kind of talked about the human rights crisis at the border. One of the more famous weeks, as you could imagine, was week 8, when we talked about drug trafficking and the narco beat, covering the narco beat. There was a lot. And so as I was looking at the course, first of all, as a professor, I was enamored with this. I'm like, oh my God, I love this. This is so amazing. They're gonna learn so much. But as I looked at the schedule that I drafted, I realized that in order for them to pull this off, I was asking a lot, because this class really required a lot of reading, much more than probably CSU students are accustomed to. I should have brought the binder, but the binder was big. The binder was probably 3 times as big as what a normal reading binder is at CSU. I mean, coming from Berkeley, I was accustomed to reading this much, but I recognized that it was probably asking too much. And not that there's anything wrong with that, right? Because every module is important. I didn't really want to get rid of any module, but I also was wondering, well, I'm asking them to do a lot of work, and what is the payoff? I didn't feel like there was really a big payoff aside from really learning the material. And so the more and more that I pondered this, and believe me, I actually spent a few days really, really thinking about this. It would even kind of wake me up at night or not allow me to go to sleep, because I really wanted to figure out how I could make this worth their while. And as I pondered that, it really became clear that we needed to go to the border. If I'm going to make them read this much material, there has to be a bigger payoff. And so I had the crazy idea, well, I'll go with them to the border. And so once I decided that it was essential to go to the border, I basically just cut some of the weeks. I merged some of the modules and cut them back. And so instead of having, 14 weeks of learning material, we had 10. And then for weeks 11 and 12, we actually went to the border. And then we had a couple of weeks to put together the stories that they were able to document from the border. And so this on-site learning component here, I think, was very important, because then it gave them an incentive to really work hard here and learn all the material. And again, when you see the work that they produced, you really get the sense that they know what they're talking about. But that would not have been possible if they really hadn't spent these first 10 weeks really learning the material and really understanding, why we're having so many issues at the border. And I really challenged them during these 10 weeks. In addition to reading the material, we would do other types of activities. We would have debates, and I would split them into 2 groups, and I would say, okay, half of you have to debate that family separation is a good thing because it creates a deterrent, and half of you have to argue that it's not a good thing. So having these debates kind of allowed them to see things from both sides of the aisle, because as you know, a lot of these issues are very polarizing. And oftentimes when Democrats and Republicans debate these issues, it's really hard to create consensus. And so even for the students, sometimes, especially with so many of them being Latino, there is a tendency to be a little biased on these issues, and I wanted them to kind of create that unbiased filter and really be able to see every single issue from both sides. And so, you know, even just having a couple of debates throughout the semester really helped with that. Okay, I'm not going to spend too much time here. This is sort of more for educators that are interested in creating a course like this, but I did want to mention that this was not easy to do. Once I decided to go, that we wanted to go to the border, honestly, it was a crazy idea. And it was a crazy idea because I really didn't realize that I was going to be going down the risk management rabbit hole. But, you know, anytime that you want to take students across the border, even though it's just Mexico and it's only 2 hours away from where we are in Orange County, it's still considered a foreign country. And so the process starts like 3 months in advance. There is a lot of red tape. In our case, at one point, we even thought it was going to be impossible to go because lo and behold, no one from our university had been allowed to go to Tijuana specifically in over 20 years because the university felt that it was too dangerous. And so, right, there's this thinking that the minute you cross the border, you are risking being kidnapped. And, you know, for me, it was actually kind of interesting because, again, I decided to do this my very first semester at Cal State Fullerton, and that was my first semester ever teaching. I'm accustomed as a journalist. I've been to Baghdad, I've been to Afghanistan. And so the way that they were reacting to this, it almost seemed like I was asking to take them to Syria. It was just like, I mean, yeah, there are dicey areas in Mexico, but it's not like you cross the Rio Grande and suddenly, you know, there are a bunch of like drug cartels waiting for you with machine guns. But sometimes it kind of felt like that's the image that people had. And so I almost thought that this wasn't going to happen. And, you know, this is where my background as a journalist really came in handy. I expressed to them that I knew what I was doing, that I would take care of them. Thankfully, nothing happened, you know, and we were able to go. And so I'm actually very proud that we were able to make the first trip to Tijuana in over 20 years. So let me tell you a little bit of sort of my teaching sort of approach, my approach to pedagogy, and why I think it's important. So obviously, I think we are all familiar with this quote by Maya Angelou. And I love this quote, right? I oftentimes refer to this quote in many aspects of my life, that people will forget what you said, they'll may even forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And it wasn't really until I became an educator that I started really thinking about this in relation to my students. And so once I decided that we needed to go to Mexico to really have a big payoff and for the students to really take away something big from this, for me, it really became about curating an experience for them. So, you know, I didn't want them to just read a book, come to class, and then, okay, the semester's over, thank you, goodbye. I really wanted this to be a transformational experience and something that could frankly even be life-changing. And so once I decided that I wanted to do that, it really became about me curating that experience. And so what I did is that we partnered with a university down in Tijuana, SETI's University, and we had a panel there about how NAFTA has changed, you know, border economics and how that has impacted, you know, trading between Mexico and the United States and Canada. And what was really, really cool is that SETI specializes in the economy. They have an amazing business program. They don't even teach journalism. And so we asked some of their economics professors to give us a lecture on border policies pertaining to NAFTA. And because my students had already done all the reading on NAFTA, they understood everything. And so it was just really, really cool to see that, you know, that the students took the time to learn about NAFTA, they knew what it was. And so by the time we were able to go down to SETI's, they really knew, you know, what these economic professors were talking about. And so that was really, really nice. I also decided that I wanted to reach out to our border patrol and ask if we could get a tour of the border. And I was actually thinking that it was going to be a resounding no. And lo and behold, the minute I asked, they quickly came back and said, absolutely. And I learned something from asking. Sometimes you just got to ask. It turns out that the Border Patrol actually has the classroom, as you can see up here in the upper left. They have a classroom and they welcome people to come in, and they gave about a 30-minute presentation about how they do their job and the kinds of things they see. And then they took us out in one of their vans for a 3-hour tour of the border, and they took us to some of the different hotspots. Here, a student is being shown how one of the underground tunnels was created by smugglers. And they kept the tunnel just because they wanted to be able to show people when they come on these tours, sort of the types of contraptions that are being built. And so it was really exciting. I think that this experience in particular, the students really loved and walked away with a really great experience. We also had other types of immersive experiences while we were down there. We got a tour of Foxconn. Foxconn is a company that fabricates your iPhones. So we were able to see how a maquiladora or a border factory works. Obviously, this still kind of went along with the NAFTA module, but we were able to see how those factories operate. One of my personal favorite parts was we went to a center that has been created for veterans who have been deported. So you have hundreds of veterans who have served, in the Army, in the military, in the Navy. And, they were promised that they would sort of have a pathway to citizenship as a reward for their service. And actually, when they returned home, they were deported, sadly. And so that was really interesting to hear their stories and to sort of, I think that's a really interesting question. Should we really be deporting people who have sacrificed their life to defend our country? And so obviously we can have a debate about that, but it was just really interesting to hear their stories. And so one of our students ended up doing a story on this, and I thought it was probably one of my favorite stories within the newscast. And then, of course, we were there to report on the migrant caravan, and you already saw the clip. So for me, it was really about, again, curating that experience and really give them as much immersive on-site learning as possible. Now, here is the thing about the way that I approach teaching. I think I really approach teaching from a teaching hospital model, right? And I think that in journalism, it's really important to approach it that way, because you need to give them as many immersive experiences as possible. Because, oftentimes what ends up happening in journalism, and even in our program, I admit it, it happens a lot, is sometimes things can become very hypothetical. So if you were ever to go to the border to cover a migrant caravan, here is what you should do. If you ever cover a mass shooting, here's what you would do. If you are ever covering a tornado, here's what you would do. And, the problem with that type of approach is that the students don't really retain the information. Because this, when you're kind of given a hypothetical, it's sort of like, oh, okay, well, I mean, when that happens, that may never happen. So my approach to teaching is, well, I don't want when, if, let's just do it. Like, I don't want like when you cover the migrant caravan, let's go cover the migrant caravan. Now you should know that there are critiques against this. There is a debate within the academic community about whether I guess journalism would fall on under what academics may refer to as professional education, right? And the critique against journalism and other programs that are considered professional programs, the main critique is that we don't promote a broad liberal paradigm of education, and that the problem with that is that because we don't promote broad liberal education, that it doesn't really prepare students with critical thinking. And I would fight against that because I think that the way that I approach education, in my case, is different. I happen to have a background in political science and ethnic studies as an undergrad, and then my grad experience is in journalism. And so I think that one of the key things that made my particular students well prepared is this broad liberal approach. So if we look back at the schedule of the class schedule, in weeks 1 through 10, I ran those weeks as if they were taking a combination of a political science / history / ethnic studies course. That is how the first 10 weeks were run. So in those 10 weeks, it didn't even really feel like a journalism. I was drilling them with content. And again, it really felt more like a poli-sci or ethnic studies course. And then we really don't get into the journalism component until week 11. So, you know, for me, just given what I've loved about creating these courses is that it really allows me to really kind of bring in the entirety of my sort of training, both in poli-sci and ethnic studies, but also in journalism. And so I would say to people who think that we're not promoting critical thinking skills or that we're not promoting interdisciplinary education in journalism, I would say that maybe some professors aren't, but I can tell you that I definitely am. Okay, so to wrap this up, I just wanna tell you about, you know, the outcome. So as I mentioned, you know, as a result of this newscast that we created at the border, we obviously won the Student Emmy, which I'm immensely proud of. But this newscast won over 30 different awards. It won also Edward R. Murrow Award, which is one of the more prestigious awards in journalism. I think the Edward R. Murrow Award, frankly, is probably even more prestigious than the Student Emmy. The Edward R. Murrow Award is sort of like the equivalent of a Pulitzer in broadcast news. And it won tons and tons of awards from the more prestigious, you know, from some of the more prestigious competitions in the collegiate journalism circuit, including the College Media Association, the Society of Professional Journalists, the National Association of Hispanic Journalists, the Associated Collegiate Press. I mean, I could go on and on and on, but there's over 30 national awards that this program won. And so, you know, for me as an educator, it's just been really exciting to kind of elevate the type of education that my students are receiving here at CSUF, and also elevate our program from sort of a local scene to more of a national collegiate journalism scene. I'm just going to conclude by showing you the little clip where Grant Gustin announced the winning of the Emmy. So
the people who make the news are superheroes. So to our superheroes in the news, I want to say thank you. Thank you for using your power for the good of us all. We're all a lot safer with you on the front lines. Thank you for arming us with vital information about what's happening in our world. Thank you for shining a spotlight on injustice. And thank you for reminding us that humanity, despite our flaws, is worth protecting.
Nominees for news are Border Emergency from California State University, Fullerton. Thousands of Central American migrants arrive at the U.S.-Mexico border seeking asylum. From Mexico as tension and protests quickly rise. Center County Report in Puerto Rico. From Pennsylvania State University. This island was devastated by Hurricane Maria.
The recovery effort is still in full swing today. We've spent here documenting the rebuild of the people and the culture. This program is our chance to share their stories with you.
MTV's News Vision, MSD Massacre, 1 year later. The team from University of Miami.
1 year since the massacre at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, the deadliest high school shooting in American history, prompting unprecedented for gun reform. Tonight, a look back at what has since the shooting.
emergency. The team from California State University, Fullerton.
My team of 8 people and a wonderful mentor, I'd like to thank the Television Academy Foundation for this opportunity. Let this be a testament to any young people of color who could only imagine reaching Emmy in their 20s, who believe that coming from the bottoms or a non-Ivy League school, it is impossible to make it. It is absolutely important for stories like ours to be told and recognized, especially in times like these, in which a global pandemic on the fronts of health and civil rights display our oppressions, in times where we see journalists who are being arrested and violated of our First Amendment right. Let this be a testament to young journalists who will let these stories be told in light of situations that they live in and through. Thank you.
All right, so that is it for the presentation portion. You know, again, I'm just really proud of the students. I wanted a student to be here today to share their impressions with you and answer any questions. Unfortunately, they're all working, right? So a good problem that happens when you win an Emmy is that people want to hire you. And so they're all out working. It's a weird time because they're in the middle of their newsrooms getting ready for the 6 o'clock news. And so unfortunately they couldn't be here. So we have a little bit more time for Q&A. And again, if you have any questions or comments about this Emmy win or about the class in general, I'd be happy to answer any questions. Or if you want to pivot and you just have questions about what you see happening in journalism today, or if you have questions about, what's happening at the border, what's happening with this racial awakening across the country, I'm happy to answer any question, because one of the things that I really try to do here now is I really try to develop curriculum that promotes cultural competency and that teaches students to cover race and ethnicity. And so I think it's very important. The border class was just the first class that I created, but now there is another course that I'm currently teaching that gets into some issues like Black Lives Matter and the hate crimes that we're seeing against the Asian community. And so obviously we're going through a very pivotal point in journalism and in our country, really. And so I'm happy to answer any questions. Janice, do you want me to call on people, or will you sort of manage that?
I can manage that for you if you don't mind. We have a couple hands up, and the first one is from Richard Fultz.
Sure.
There he is.
Congratulations.
Thank you, Richard.
I am very proud of you and your university, but do you talk to your students, or are you concerned about the future in journalism broadly? Or, I mean, it seems like a very difficult future.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that is a huge question, and sure, I think we worry about it. I definitely worry about it. I think that, we really don't know what the future of journalism is going to look like, frankly. And I think, that there's a lot of experimentation, but what we do know is that people are not really reading as much as they used to. One of the things that I will share, I think it's fascinating, and I think that as an educator, I get a firsthand look at what the trends are with the millennials, and then even this new generation, the Zoomers or Generation Z. I really get to see how they consume information and how they learn. And what I'm finding is that these newer generations, they just don't like to read. They really don't. And so again, going back to my class, that is one of the main reasons why I was so concerned with giving them so much reading, because I figured, oh my God, they're not going to read this. I know that they don't read. They don't read the way that I used to read or that you used to read in college. They just don't. And so that does worry me, because that directly impacts journalism. I mean, we know that newspapers are dying. We know that people are not reading newspapers as much as they used to. We know that most people that watch TV news are over the age of 55. Right? And that's just not going to get better. However, here is the one sort of thing that kind of keeps me hopeful. We do know that when our country goes through periods of crises, and we obviously have gone through crises, this past year with the pandemic, I can even point to like maybe when we were covering Hurricane Katrina. Anytime people really want information and we're going through a crisis, then our belief in journalism, you know, gets reawakened. And then we realize once again why journalism is important. And so I think that maybe the way that journalism is presented is going to change. It's obviously changing. I would imagine, and here's just my prediction, I think eventually, you know, people will not be coming home to watch the 6 p.m. news. I think eventually it's all going to have to be on demand. I think it's going to have to be either on Hulu or on on-demand platforms. So I think maybe just the platform and where you consume it will change, but I think it won't go away in its entirety, because I think as a country, we understand and value its importance. And when we really know that we need information, and I think this past year is a perfect example, we rely on journalists to bring it to us. And so I think that we are in a weird period where no one knows what's going to happen, but I think it's just a matter of the platforms and the way that we consume it will change, but I don't think it can go away in its entirety because it's definitely needed.
Where might your students go? What kind of directions?
We're actually pushing very hard for digital, you know, because, you know, I can tell you when I started in journalism back in the day during the Peter Jennings era, we would send entire teams overseas. So when I went overseas, most of the time, I would go as a producer. I would go overseas with like Diane or one of our correspondents, and then she would bring an assistant, and then we would have a camera person, and we would have a sound person. It would be like a team of 6 or 7 people, right? And then, so this is when I started off in the 1990s, and then I left journalism professionally like 4 years ago. And by the time that I left in 2017, when we went to cover the crisis in Venezuela, they only sent me by myself, and I had to be the producer, the cameraman, and everything. And so we're in a period where journalists are just being asked to do more. And so what I impart on my students is that you now have to do everything. And so now the shift has kind of shifted into people becoming what we call multimedia journalists, where they have to be able to pick up the camera and do the shooting and do the editing and be the reporter. And obviously that does create taxation, right? Because suddenly what 4 people used to do, only 1 person does. And that does create danger because you can sort of lose editorial content because you're so fixated on having to do so much. But unfortunately, the news agencies just don't care because they want to save money, and they feel that in order to be able to survive, you know, they need to save money. And so sadly, you know, I think that, you know, the product does suffer, but I don't see that changing. And so what we're really training our students to do is to be able to do it all. They have to be able to do it all. And I mean, I think the good news with that is that then you become versatile, right? Then suddenly you're not pigeonholed. So back in the day, if you were a cameraman and we get rid of all the cameramen, ooh, that's bad news. What are you going to do? But now, if you know how to be a cameraman, if you know how to be a producer, if you know how to be a reporter, then you have more career options and you can kind of pivot. And so in that way, I guess that's a positive.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard.
Thank you. We're going to move on. Betty, you had a question?
Yes. Hi.
Hi.
And excuse me if you've already, if this was at the very beginning, I joined a couple minutes late, but were these students undergraduates or graduates?
They were undergraduates, actually. Yeah.
And the other thing is, so where was the class? I mean, if you look at the schedule of classes, there isn't even a journalism department.
You mean at Cal State Fullerton?
I just looked right now.
Oh, so our College of Communications is,
Okay.
we're in the College of Communication. So all the journalism courses appear actually under comm. And within the comm department, we have the journalism concentration. And so we're housed, it's journalism, it's public relations, it's advertising, cinema and television, and entertainment and tourism. So we're in the College of Communication. So all the journalism courses will appear under communications.
Okay, well, the award is very impressive, but your concepts and your, you know, the enthusiasm you put into your classes. That's very interesting too. So congratulations.
Thank you, Betty. I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
There's a question in chat from Barbara Unsworth. How did you happen to transition from journalism to teaching? And she comments, it seems like a big leap.
Oh my God, yes. I think that's the hardest thing that I've ever done. Believe it or not, I thought like maybe covering the news out there was hard. This was difficult. And to be honest, it was kind of an accident, if I'm honest. I loved very much being a journalist, but you know, as you can imagine, when I never worked in local news. I only worked at the network level. So I was one of those people that got lucky right out of college. I was hired at a big network and I was working with people like Peter Jennings and Diane Sawyer. But that creates a lot of pressure. And so, you know, you're always constantly having to be on the top of your game. There is no room for mistakes because if you make one little mistake, it can be like a huge national embarrassment. And so you got to be on it, you know, and also the lifestyle is really hectic. I was never around. Like people would invite me to birthday parties and I never knew if I was going to be here or not because my life consisted of getting calls at weird times, oftentimes in the middle of the night. Hey, we think there are 33 miners trapped in Chile. Can you run to LAX and get on a plane and go? Sure. So that was my life. And then you never knew how long you were going to be. I can tell you, you were going to be gone for. I can tell you that when we got sent to Haiti for that big earthquake in 2010, I thought I was going to be gone for like 2 weeks. I was gone for 2 months. And so I did that for 17 years. And honestly, when you're young, like that lifestyle is exciting and fascinating. But, you know, once you hit your 40s, you just kind of want to sleep in your own bed. You're not excited about going to Chile anymore. You've already done everything. And, you know, I had to really start thinking about what I wanted to fall back on. And I'll be honest, I just got lucky that I had a master's. Like, thank God I got that master's, or otherwise I wouldn't have been able to teach. And so the more and more I really thought about what I wanted to do for my second chapter in life, I really realized that what I really kind of enjoyed my last sort of 2 years that I was working professionally, I enjoyed the mentoring. So whenever we would get interns, I really enjoyed the really being able to kind of walk them through and kind of, hey, don't do that. They're going to hate you if you do that. So I really enjoyed the mentoring. And so I really started thinking that also as universities invited me to speak, I came to CSUF once for Com Week. I was attending different universities. I really enjoyed speaking in front of students. But honestly, it sounded good on paper. It sounded good in theory. But then I also thought like, oh my God, I've never created a syllabus. Like, how do you do that? And so it was very daunting. And I didn't really know if once I got in here, I was going to hate it. And so I came in my first semester as an adjunct and I realized, oh, okay, this isn't too bad. I didn't like the public speaking at first, actually, but I figured, okay, it's not too bad. And then after my first semester, they said, we need you to stay full-time. Like, we want you here full-time. And I wasn't prepared to do that, to be honest. Like, I wasn't ready. But they kind of impressed upon me, like, we don't know when another job will be open. You might get lucky, or it might be years before another opening comes available. So then I just figured I had to jump on it. And to be honest, it's the best decision that I've made because I really, really love teaching. I love journalism, but I actually do believe that my calling in life is actually teaching. And I was actually telling Janice before we started that I have a few Emmys under my belt. And sure, I was happy and excited when I won my Emmys. But when my students won an Emmy, I actually got teary-eyed. And I never got teary-eyed when I won an Emmy. So that's how I know that I made the right choice. And I do love it. And, you know, I'm also the first Latino that is teaching in our department. You know, we're 42% Latino. So I love the fact that my students see themselves represented through me, because I think a lot of times for, you know, people of color, these dreams sort of sound like crazy. Like, you know, when you come from working class parents, the fact that you want to work at ABC News sounds like a dream, but it sounds like it's not achievable. and you just need to meet one person that has done it. And so then now my students, I think like the best thing that I could do for my students is validate their dreams and let them know that it's actually doable, because now they have someone that's actually done it and that can walk them through. So I think just being able to validate that for my students is really great.
Great, terrific. Marion, you had a question?
Yes, the press seems to be pretty good about going out and covering big things and television and all. But my concern is our towns and our cities. How are people going to get information to know who to vote for as their representatives when there's so little news out there?
God, yeah, you're absolutely right. And I actually think that the biggest danger with news today, aside from, like the lack of trust, and like, I think there's been a lot of damage with this like fake news. It kind of has made a lot of people not trust the news anymore. But I think that the even bigger problem is what you just hit on, Marianne. I think that we've seen news organizations shift toward like national seems to be like the big focus. And now we don't have people covering city hall meetings. Now we don't have people really covering school board meetings. And that is what really actually impacts our daily lives. And we've lost that. We've lost that because, the small papers have gone under. They don't have the funding. You'll be happy to know that, at least in my classes, I see the student media as a big component of the community. So I actually make sure that my students go out and cover city hall meetings and cover, the community, because, back in the day in the 80s, we had OC News. We had something, we had the OC Register. I mean, obviously the OC Register is still around, but we had more of a local presence, and not just in Orange County. You mentioned a lot of little cities, they're undergoing this problem too. But yeah, you're right. A lot of people are not covering local news anymore, and that's sad. I will share something that I do know with you. The Knight Foundation, which is one of the big foundations that gives free money to journalism institutions and companies, they have a big push toward returning toward local news. And I'm really happy to see that, because they are investing only in local, hyper-local newsrooms. And I think that's really important. I think that more people need to focus on local news, because, that is what really impacts our daily life. And sometimes even when I think of myself as being pretty informed. And sometimes when I get the ballot to elect my local representative, I don't know who none of these people are. And I wish that there was a cheat sheet that the LA Times or the OC Register would give me, because back in the day they would. But now it's upon me to really become educated. And unfortunately, I hope that more organizations like the Knight Foundation invest in local news, because at the end of the day, you don't have people doing it because there's no money for them to do it. And a lot of small newspapers have gone under. I would hate to see the Fullerton Observer go under, but also, if there's no revenue, if there is no money coming in, well, how are they going to keep printing, and how are we going to keep getting it? Again, at least on our end, I think the student organizations can sort of help to facilitate that. And maybe there needs to be more of an effort at all universities to really kind of make the local student organizations the heart of the city, right? Because at least, we have a presence, we have student reporters that can go out and do that. And so I know that here in Fullerton, we do that, but I would like to see other universities also step in and fill that void.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Marianne.
Great questions. So if there aren't any other questions, I had the privilege of speaking with Jesus prior to the segment, and we touched on a whole bunch of things. But one subject that you mentioned that you're teaching, Jesus, is why understanding the lynching in the history of the U.S. is so important to understanding our current racial inequities. Would you mind summarizing that for us? Because as you know, this is part of our diversity series all the years, And we will do this again in the fall. So if you find this informative, please stay tuned. But can that be summarized though, Jesus, to give it?
Yes. Okay, I'll do my best. You're asking me to summarize something that might take an entire semester to cover. But so again, the border class that I created was sort of like the first kind of class that promotes cultural competency and that trains students to report on race and ethnicity. This spring, rather, actually right now, I'm teaching a class on reporting on minorities, and the focus of that class is learning how to report on race and ethnicity. And I thought that it was really important to create that class because, as you all know, we're kind of going through a really kind of prominent time in the fabric of our country, because we're experiencing sort of like this racial awakening. Obviously, it's not the first time that we have experienced something like this, but a lot of people coincide that this time it actually feels different. I think it feels different because this time companies are really sort of making an effort, and I think now companies are really starting to kind of put their money where they should, and they are really trying to kind of I feel like every single company these days is sort of hiring a diversity officer. And so I think this time it feels different for those reasons. So anyway, as Janice was mentioning, in this class, we go through, different modules. Like one module is about why we're seeing so many hate crimes perpetrated against Asian Americans. And the other module is about the Black Lives Matter movement. So as you guys know, as a result of the killing, which was videotaped, of George Floyd, there's been other instances like Trayvon Martin, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery. There's so many instances that we've seen where police brutality has been captured on camera. You have this movement of Black Lives Matters emerge. And my students were very interested in the name Black Lives Matter. Why is it being called Black Lives Matter? You might also remember that one of the critiques against the name Black Lives Matter was that it's not inclusive. Like, well, why only Black Lives Matter? Like, why isn't it all lives matter? And so I wanted to really get into some of the importance of why the name Black Lives Matter emerged and the significance of it. And in order to really be able to do that, what I had to do, as Janice mentioned, I had to go way back and talk about slavery, and I had to talk about the legacy of lynching in America. And so, the interesting thing about lynching is that lynching didn't actually become a thing until after the Civil War, right? And we had between 1860 and about 1950, 1960, we had over 4,000 Black people lynched in America. And so that, in order to really understand the significance of Black Lives Matter, we really need to go all the way back and understand the historical significance of lynching. Why were so many lynchings allowed to happen? It wasn't actually perceived as a bad thing. In fact, one of the things that my students learn is that when you look at lynchings, they were popular, they were well attended. People would stay after the lynchings and they would collect limbs, they would collect fingernails as souvenirs. They would send postcards, they would take pictures of themselves. Hey, I'm at a lynching, selfie. And then they would turn it into a postcard and send it to people. So it was like actually perceived as an attraction, and people, children would attend lynchings, women would attend lynchings. So, we've kind of looked at how the history of lynching in America really racialized Black people in this country. And so basically, then we get into the history of policing in America. You might, some of you may know this, but the first official police force in the United States was the slave patrols. And the slave patrols were created to ensure that slaves would not leave the South and flee to the North. So the very, very institutionalization of a policing force is rooted in slavery. And then we add the lynching component. Well, it's no coincidence then that we're having a policing problem in America, right? Because it's been rooted in maintaining white supremacy and sort of, you know, keeping Black people from running away. And so historically, you know, we do know that African Americans are treated very differently by our racial justice system. So just one tidbit, Black people are 3 times more likely to be killed by a cop than non-Black people, right? And so then going back to the term Black Lives Matter, if we really want to understand where it comes from, well, we got to understand the history of policing in America and what it was rooted in. We got to understand the history of lynching. When you put all that together, well, please don't kill us, then suddenly that takes a different form, right? It really means, please, please, no, we really mean it. Please don't kill us. You've been killing us ever since the 1860s. 4,000 of us have already died as a result of lynching. Many other of us have died as a result of police brutality. Please, we've had enough. So that's where the term Black Lives Matter comes from. And I think that when people say, oh no, but all lives matter. Well, yes, of course, all lives matter. No one is saying that all lives don't matter. But I think the African-American community has had a different experience, and we have to understand the history of lynching and policing in our country and able to understand the significance of the name. Sorry, Janice, I tried to do that as best as I could, but I know I'm kind of leaving some things out.
No, that was excellent. I don't know about the rest of you, but I thought that was well summarized. And yes, now we know where the term stems from and why it's important. So I'll ask for final questions now or comments. Anyone? Okay, or we're going to let Dr. Ayala go, and hopefully we can ask him to return sometime in the future. But most engaging and informative presentation. We thank you so very much for taking the time because we know you're a busy, busy person.